with a little bit of page 47, where I grab a book, read page 47, and talk a little bit about it. Today my book of choice is Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. I just grabbed this one off my shelf. This one has made it through several purges of various books. As I've said before, I don't keep books unless they're meaningful to me. I pass them on to someone else, or I give them away to a library or half-price books or something else. But this one was meaningful to me. I read this when I was pretty young, probably like 15 or 16. This was actually a book before it was a film. A lot of people know the film with Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie. Huge crush on Angelina Jolie in that movie, but that's beside the point. It was a book first. And the book is actually a memoir written by this woman about the time that she was actually admitted to a mental hospital in the 60s, which was very different than they are today. I mean, they're not all great today, but you're very limited now to how long you can be admitted to an inpatient facility. They're basically designed to be crisis resolution centers and just stabilize a person so they're not about to hurt themselves or someone else. Whereas back then, you could admit somebody and they could basically be there kind of indefinitely, like as long as somebody was paying for it and as long as a doctor said they needed to be there. So it's really interesting. And it's been years since I read it, so I'm interested to see what was on page 47. So let's see. And it looks like for some reason I bookmarked something. I often bookmark things that I find interesting. That's not page 47, so we'll start with page 47. Here we go. Page 47 is from a chapter titled Applied Topography. I don't know if you can see that or not. The seclusion room etiquette was, if you weren't locked in, anybody could join you. A nurse could interrupt your yelling to try to find out why you were yelling, or some other crazy person could come in and start yelling too. Hence the request business. Freedom was the price of privacy. The real purpose of the seclusion room, though, was to quarantine people who'd gone bananas. As a group, we maintained a certain level of noisiness and misery. Anyone who sustained a higher level for more than a few hours was put in seclusion. Otherwise, the staff reasoned, we would all turn up the volume on our nuttiness and the staff would lose control. There were no objective criteria for deciding to put someone into seclusion. It was relative, like the grading curve in a high school. Seclusion worked. After a day or a night in there with nothing to do, most people calmed down. If they didn't, they went to maximum security. Our double-locked doors, our steel mesh window screens, our kitchen stocked with plastic knives and locked unless a nurse was with us, our bathroom doors that didn't lock. All this was medium security. Maximum security was another world. So yeah, that's interesting. That's talking about her experience of a seclusion room in McLean Hospital in 1967. 67 or 68. So that works a little bit differently now. It sounds like back then you could just, there wasn't any criteria for putting people in those rooms. Now, and this is what's supposed to happen, now mental health hospitals are supposed to have very specific criteria they have to meet for when they will isolate a person or restrain a person, and they're supposed to document it. Like typically they're not supposed to do it unless somebody is like violent or, you know, violent towards others or violent towards themselves. Another thing that there's been a lot more of is what people would refer to as chemical restraint, which is where you're not physically holding a person down, you're not like strapping them into anything or anything like that, but they're given some kind of like a sedative, usually in the form of an injection, to subdue them. And it basically eliminates the need for things like, it's basically a tranquilizer, so it eliminates the need for physical, mechanical restraint. They term it chemical restraint, and they are also supposed to have very specific criteria for when somebody will use that too. Now, facilities mess up, or they're just crappy and they don't do it right and they don't do it like they're supposed to. And that's where things like oversight and auditing are really important, because there are sometimes reasonable times that you might need to do that. Like if a person, like, I don't know, has broken a window and has a shard of glass and they're threatening people with it, you know, they might be in a psychotic state and not know where they are and not know what's going on, and it's not necessarily their fault, but you have to do something to subdue them, at least until they're in a better frame of mind. So there's legitimate reasons to do it, but it's supposed to be, everyone who is involved in any kind of restraint or seclusion in a mental health facility is supposed to be trained specifically in that. They're also supposed to be trained in what's called de-escalation techniques, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's where you talk a person down. You know, you talk to them in a way that's calm and, considerate and empathic, to try to find out what's going on with them. And you're supposed to try to talk with a person and try to understand. That's called verbal de-escalation, before you resort to things like injections and restraint and seclusion rooms and stuff like that. But I think in the 60s, you could kind of just do what you wanted. Within reason. Maybe sometimes not within reason. I mean, there's a lot of horrible stories about the history of mental facilities in the United States and elsewhere. It's not perfect now. I know a lot of people with quite terrible horror stories. Another thing that people who work in those facilities are supposed to be able to do is what's called non-violent crisis intervention. Or, I'm sorry, not non-violent, but just crisis intervention, where they're supposed to, if you do have to use restraint on a person, you're supposed to be trained to do it in such a way that you're least likely to cause injury. Not every facility trains its people as well as it should. It sucks, but it's true. Probably some people out there have had bad experiences with stuff like this before. Even under the best circumstances, even if everything is done completely correctly and there was a very specific need for it that made sense, like if a person is hallucinating that there's like bears attacking them, that's real to them, and they're going to react and behave as if there's bears attacking them. Maybe there's not actually that real danger, but they're going to lash out, they're going to do violent things, they're going to be dangerous to themselves and other people. But even if it's used for a positive reason, not positive, that's the wrong word, but even if it's used for something reasonable, it was necessary, and it's done right, it's still incredibly traumatic to the person receiving it. Incredibly traumatic. So it should be done as a last resort always. People aren't always perfect about that. And I didn't know any of that when I first read this in my teens, but I know that now because of my education and my training and all that stuff. But it's really interesting to kind of look back and see what it was like then. Somebody close to me was actually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia during this time period. So what's described here is probably closer to what that person would have experienced in an inpatient facility. I kind of want to see what I bookmarked, because apparently I bookmarked something that I thought was really interesting. Oh, I remember this. I think I used it as a monologue. It's a chapter. Yeah, I used it as a monologue to audition for something like a million years ago. Not a million, like, crap, how old am I? I'm 37. I was probably like 17, so 20 years. I don't remember it. I'm going to read it, though. The chapter is called New Frontiers in Dental Health. My 1.5-year sentence was running out, and it was time to plan my future. I was nearing 20. I'd had 2 jobs in my life. 3 months selling gourmet cookware, much of which I dropped and broke, and 1 week typing in the Harvard billing office, terrifying students by sending them term bills for $10,900 that were meant to read $1,900. I made these mistakes because I was terrified by the supervisor. The supervisor was an elegant and attractive black man who roamed all day among the aisles of typists, watching us work. He smoked while doing this. When I lit a cigarette, he pounced on me. "You can't smoke," he said. "But you're smoking." "Typists are not permitted to smoke." I looked around the room. All the typists were women. All the supervisors were men. All the supervisors were smoking. All the typists were not. When break time came at 10:15, the bathroom was stuffed with smoking typists. "Can't we smoke in the hall?" I asked. There was an ashtray outside the bathroom. But we couldn't. We had to smoke in the bathroom. The other problem was clothes. "No mini skirts," said the supervisor. Well, this put me in a pickle, as I had only mini skirts and I had as yet no paycheck. "Why?" I asked. "No mini skirts," he repeated. So smoking was Monday, mini skirts was Tuesday. Wednesday I wore a black mini skirt with black tights and hoped for the best. "No mini skirts," he said. I scooted to the bathroom for a quick cigarette. "No smoking except on break," he muttered as he passed by my desk on his next round. This was when I began making my high-priced mistakes. Thursday, he beckoned me over to his desk, where he sat, smoking. "Making some mistakes," he said. "We can't have that." "If I could smoke," I said, "I wouldn't make so many." He just shook his head. Friday, I didn't go in. I didn't call either. I lay in bed, smoking, and thinking about the office. The more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. I couldn't take all these rules seriously. I started to laugh, thinking of the typists jammed into the bathroom smoking. But it was my job. Not only that, I was the one person who had trouble with the rules. Everybody else accepted them. Was this a mark of my madness? All weekend I thought about it. Was I crazy? Or right? In 1967, this was a hard question to answer. Even 25 years later, it's still a hard question to answer. I mean, sexism. It was pure sexism. Isn't that the answer? It's true, it was sexism, but I'm still having trouble with rules about smoking. Now we've got smokeism. It's one of the reasons I became a writer. To be able to smoke in peace. "A writer," I said, when my social worker asked me what I planned to do when I got out of the hospital. "I'm going to be a writer." "Well, that's a nice hobby, but how are you going to earn a living?" My social worker and I did not like each other. I didn't like her because she didn't understand that this was me and I was going to be a writer. I was not going to type term bills or sell au gratin bowls or do any other stupid things. She didn't like me because I was arrogant and uncooperative and probably still crazy for insisting on being a writer. "A dental technician," she said. "That's the ticket. The training is only 1 year. I'm sure you'd be able to manage the responsibilities." "You don't understand," I said. "No, you don't understand," she said. "I hate the dentist. It's nice, clean work. You have to be realistic. Valerie, I said when I got back to the ward. She wants me to be a dental technician. It's impossible. Oh? Valerie didn't seem to understand either. It's not bad. Nice, clean work. Luckily, I got a marriage proposal and they let me out. In 1968, everybody could understand a marriage proposal. Yeah, I didn't mean to read the entire chapter, but it's a good chapter. I mean, it's interesting. That's the first time I've read that in like 20 years, so that's kind of wild. But I remember it. Like once I didn't remember it until I started reading it, and then I remembered it perfectly. It's funny how memories do that. I'm sorry for my lighting. I don't know why it's flipping on and off like that. It is what it is. I think I relate to that chapter now more than I did then. I mean, I always related to it. There's this undertone of like, you know that the rules are stupid, but when you call it out, everybody looks at you like you're nuts. And nobody seems to realize that the rules are stupid but you. And then you start to second guess yourself, like, well, maybe I am the crazy one. I'm the only one who has a problem with these rules. Or maybe I'm the only one that has the guts to say anything about it. And that still holds. Like that holds up many, many years later. I don't smoke anymore, but there is a bit of smokeism. For good reason, you don't want people to have to be around it that don't want to be. And there's a lot of different options now. There's vapes and things like that, but I digress. This ended up being way more than a page 47 and way longer. But if you're still here, thanks for hanging out. Read it. It's a good book.